This is Patrick Shea speaking, but for most of this video you're going to hear Judy Barnes explain her love of horses that started when she was 3 years old.
I try to protect these horses, keep them safe, and I make sure they have food and water. Riverside, California was where I was born and raised, and my neighbor had horses and she'd let me sit on them and walk underneath them, and I just fell in love with horses. And she was an equine artist, and so as you can see, I love equine art. It's all over my house.
And you make it.
And then as I got older and found out about wild horses, what I love about them is the freedom they have. And that's the freedom I've always wanted. To just not be responsible to anybody and just run go when I wanted to go. And then when I moved to Taos, somebody started telling me about the wild horses up here. So for the first 2 years, for 2000 and 2001 or 2, I would just come up and photograph and sit with them. And then in 2005, I bought the house. 2007, I set up a Colorado nonprofit. And then 2014, I set up a federal nonprofit. I like being up here all alone, out in the wilderness. But see, all the young ones want to go smell the mom. Those are probably all males.
And they're from separate bands, right?
Or they could be in her family. See, she's telling the boys to get back. And that's her stallion, and he's running that young
That's
male
his job,
off.
kind of, isn't it? Or
His name was the Lake Band Stallion, but a lot of people called him Big Mike.
Lake Band?
Lake, yeah. He stayed over on the Mesa side of the lake all the time. He was the first one that accepted me into the family. And I'd go sit over there and play with the babies. They'd all come and, nibble on my shirt and stuff. And then when he'd let me sit with them for about 15 minutes or so, and then he'd give me a look, which meant time for you to go. And then when they snake, they put their head down and push, and so he'd gather up all the girls and they'd leave. But when I moved into this house, I met the previous owners, and they said, yeah, 36 horses were taken away from here yesterday. And so I called brand inspectors in Denver and around here, and they said, well, they didn't go through us because they wouldn't allow them to go through with babies. And so I just started doing research and trying to, pulling things together, and found out more and more. Well, a bunch of the horses had been taken to slaughter, and I thought he was in it.
So who's doing the slaughtering? What is that? Taking the slaughter, is it one thing?
Well, it's the local ranchers take them to the sale barn in Monte Vista, and then the kill buyers buy them and haul them down to Mexico.
Wow. And then they get paid by
by the pound.
not for the meat.
And the meat all goes to Europe and Japan. I keep tabs on these horses. I count them. I know who's who. And they're not overpopulated. They try to say they were 600 out in the Brownie Hills, and I said, no, there's 200. And I showed them a map and how many horses were in each location. And I went out several weekends in a row and counted them, and there were only 200, not 600. The wild horses eat so much less, the cows would die on what the wild horses could survive on. They drink less water, and they eat less food, and that's why they're small horses. They have developed, over centuries to sustain themselves on less food. Well, I have one DNA test on Papa, he's an old guy that I took in. He had to be at least 40.
Really?
So I send these in. I put the year of it, the year of the horse, the day it was. Yeah. It's going to help me in the long run to get the state to recognize them as a heritage species and protect them by doing DNA and keeping track of that. See, these horses are on the old Spanish Trail, which is Road 21 back there. So these are descendants of the Spanish horses brought in the 1500s. In the winter, I spend $500 a week on hay and $1,000 a month on water. I get as many donations as I can, but I need a bigger database for donations. Yeah, once the summer comes, they go off and do their wild horse thing, and that's what keeps their feet worn down, so they don't need to, like nobody's going to catch them anyway to trim their feet. So that it keeps them in better health when they're walking around, and they're in better health when they're not fat. They've got the fight or flight instinct. So if they're heavy, they can't flight quite as well.
That's right.
There's about 200 total on the mesa and the surrounding areas. So maybe about 30 down by the highway, 100 on Dos Hermanos, and the rest are up here.
And Dos Hermanos is like south of the reservoir.
East.
Yeah. Okay. Man. That's it. That's the whole group, and they all come around. That's really cool. I guess I'm not my disbelief. Like, that's a lot to come around, but it.
In the winter, I've had as many as 100 horses here eating hay, and
Wow.
and what I've started doing, because I used to throw flakes of hay from the bales, and when I had my knee surgery, I knew I couldn't do that anymore. So now I get the big round bales, cut them open, and roll them down the hill, so there's a whole whole strand of hay.
You just line up.
Yeah.
So it's like a buffet.
It's exactly. It looks like a horse buffet. They just line up and eat.
Now the testing. So this is feeding. Mostly is winter feeding and water. Which,
So I do every time one passes away. In fact,
Okay.
I have 2 samples sitting right over there. I've got to mail in.
wow.
And they go to the University of California, Davis. And then it takes about a couple of weeks to get the results back. And like Papa, my old guy, he's 90.3% Spanish. And Mike would have been probably about maybe 80% Spanish.
Big Mike.
Yeah, Big Mike. The horses told me when I first moved here that not to fight a battle I couldn't win. And I said, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be fighting for you guys. And I know that there'll be people that will take over when I'm not fighting. Because I'm 73. I'm getting tired. Basically, I'm their, grandmother, or overseer.
This has been 16 years now. I mean,
This is 16 years. Wow. And they trust that when I show up, everything will be okay.